trade institutions. The climate ambitions that you saw were rather modest at the COP29 most recently, where the developing worlds have actually complained about the lack of commitments made by the rich countries, but also the failure of the peace and security pillar of the United Nations and the inability of international institutions to maintain peace and stability. I think that's the big question. And we're going to discuss this in the next 40-odd minutes or 45 minutes with a fantastic bunch of leaders, thinkers, and speakers who will share with us their thoughts on how can we revive and reform the political institutions, the financial institutions, the development institutions that serve the largest number of people, the whole idea of a liberal order. Was it a chimera? Does it exist? Does it need to be reimagined and redefined? And of course, in the backdrop of this whole new discourse emanating from Western capitals about a new Cold War and the G2 world and the US-China competition, etc. And how does the South and how do colleagues in the North who are joining this panel visualize some of these big questions? So let me start with your permission with Prime Minister Musamara. Let me start with you, sir. Sitting where you are, and we had a chat with you last year. It's been a year since for the second edition. How do you visualize this world of today? What is our role in it? And have we moved the needle? Have we progressed, or has there been a step back?
Thank you. Thank you, Samir. Hello, everyone. I would like to first thank the organizer of this important meeting, and especially the President Thabo Mbeki here. The President did a very good thing for our country in 2003, 2004, and especially for Timbuktu, alongside his vision about African Renaissance. And I would like to start by thanking him for all things done during his term. I come from the western part of Africa, Mali precisely. And from this part of Africa, we are concerned by how to deal with the global issues and precisely to think concretely. The most important word is being concrete, doing think, achieving goals. And about the global South, my first question would be, what is really the global South? And all of us from Africa, Latin America, South America, Asia, we have to seriously think about what we will put in the concept of global South. To fix what it could be politically, diplomatically, even ideologically, and to retain some specific goals which could be achieved by the global South as area, as regions. And on this way, I would like maybe to propose some specific goals to the global South countries, regions. The first is climate, for sure, climate. In this way, how the countries from this global South could put together their strength, their will, to achieve some specific goals on the climate issue. This is the first. The second is financing the development. How we'll raise money, financial means, to help countries and a region like Africa to get infrastructure, enough infrastructure, energy, give job to youth, how we could leverage the opportunities around the world as a South to get this job done. This is the second. And the third is the UN reform. We have been talking about this issue the last 40 years with nearly zero result. How, as a global South countries, we can put together our means to get the reform of the United Nations done, especially the reform of the Security Council, and especially giving the permanent seat to the global South countries. How we can do that? I think we have to work on it to gather our strength and to retain a very specific and a very concrete way to get these different goals achieved. That will make Global South really leading the multilateral world we are facing.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm tempted to come to the speaker right after you, but I thought I'll probably first go to Minister Anand Sharma. I'll bring you in, sir. You were, of course, the former Minister for Commerce, an architect of most of the trade conversations that took place for the longest period, most important ones. Also someone who has, in the External Affairs Ministry, revived and resuscitated India-Africa ties a couple of decades ago. And someone who's been following the big global questions for a while now. He has laid out an agenda for you, sir. We need more money for climate action, we need more money for development, and we need to reform the UN. In your view, how likely is it? Or does the Global South now need to think up of some new ways of progressing their agenda in the backdrop of failing global institutions?
Thank you, Samir. At the outset, I would like to thank you and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation for having convened these conversations, this meeting, on the eve of the transfer of G20 presidency from Brazil to South Africa. And our best wishes to South Africa, this government and the people. It's also significant, as you had mentioned, that 4 in a row, beginning from Indonesia, India, Brazil, and now South Africa, the Global South is reasserting, raising its voice on issues which have been discussed, debated, many declarations made, but words have remained where they were. If my mind takes me back to the Millennium Summit, the Glen Eagles. At that time, these were the Millennium Developmental Goals. Please read that document. Read the latest document. All the declarations of the last 24 years. Have we reached anywhere? The answer is a firm no. Even the Rio Declaration of G20 says that. And what? That the goals, SDGs, which should have been met, should be completed by 2030. So we don't have 6 years, but 5 years now. Only 17% of the goals targets have been achieved. Baku on climate change, as former Prime Minister Mara was saying, but Baku has been a disappointment. What is the commitment coming? At Glen Eagles, the commitment was 1% of the GDP of the rich countries. Has it come? No. At Baku, 250 billion. The other day I was told in Johannesburg, 150 billion of that is coming from debt servicing of the poor and developing countries. So where is the commitment? The real challenge is, if we want to achieve, countries of the South today have a voice, have strength. 80% of the world's population, 50% of the world's GDP, that is the Global South. Unless and until the Global South finds its rightful place in the organizations, I'm talking of multilateralism, which are mandated to take decisions and uphold the rule-based international order, nothing is going to come out, because we cannot ignore social and economic challenges, whether hunger, poverty, inequality between nations, among the nations, within the societies, communities. But equally important is the wars raging. Wars are being reignited. Old wounds have reopened, old fault lines. There are many unsettled issues. We are talking of Ukraine and Russia. We're talking of what's happening in Middle East, the kind of humanitarian catastrophe that is taking place in Gaza. Where is multilateralism? I have carefully gone through all the declarations and the UN resolutions. The same leaders who actually can stop it are condemning it, are talking of the two-nation solution of creation of viable state of Palestine within secure borders. And unfortunately, those who have dominated the multilateral order are today not showing any commitment to sustain it. I'm sorry to say, if that was the case, why parties which are at war are not being nudged to the negotiating table? Secondly, those who are expected to adhere to a rule-based international order are either in tacit collusion or endorsing the parties which are at war, signing a declaration, but also signing orders for weapons, not for money for climate change, not the transfer of technology, not effective time-bound agenda for mitigation. So what I have to say, unless and until the global south makes it very clear to the entire world, because we are in an interconnected world, interdependent, connected by technology. When anything happens in one part of the world, all of us are equally affected. We have seen during COVID time, we have seen during these wars. I'll only say one message, as President Mbeki had said, should go about the reforms in the multilateral institutions. We should be led, as you have rightly chosen this theme, global south-led. We can do it. Asia, Africa are at an inflection point of history. We will have a defining influence. The message should be, you cannot decide about us without us. We have to be there where decisions are made. Urgent UN reforms to reflect contemporary global realities, a world order that is equitable, fair, and just.
Thank you.
That's what I have to say, unless and until we take that forward, because the G20 declaration has also said it. Another hope has come from the BRICS Plus meeting. And we have also to see why the G20 came into being and why the BRICS Plus and what we can achieve.
Madam Speaker, let me turn to you now. In many ways, your colleagues have pinned all their hopes on your presidency of the G20.
No, true. Thank you very much. Just taking on what has been said, but also in the inaugural inputs that have been made. I think for me, one important thing is for the Global South to remain consistent. Not to tire, to hold those who are still refusing to actually abide by the multilateral institutions, to abide by the instruments that all of us have achieved. And I think if one looks at what South Africa did in actually, on the matter of Gaza, taking Israel to the ICC, was, in my view, utilizing the instruments that collectively we have agreed and actually testing whether the commitment we've made in building these institutions and developing the particular instruments and frameworks, can it work? But it was not just about testing, but it was indeed standing in solidarity with those who are oppressed and marginalized. And we saw the participation of other members in the Global South who actually joined in that effort. We might say we're not yet there, but we've actually seen the results, that it is possible. And for me, as members of the Global South, it is important to stay the course on issues that we've been raising about the reform of the UN institution, ensuring that there is inclusion of the majority of the voices of the world who are in the global south. But at the same time, I would say having alternatives that can show that it is possible to have a different world than we have today. I think the formation of IPSA, the BRICS, has been, in my view, one of those alternatives of saying we can build a better world, which can actually have shared values about our collective development, which can address the issues that are common for us, not only in the South, but also in the North. If you look at the issue of climate change, it's not just affecting the global South, but the entire community of the world. And I think we need to stay the course in actually calling for accountability from those who have not seen the light as yet, even though their communities are already adversely impacted upon.
Madam Speaker, there's a report from the UN itself in one of its archives, now archives, but at that time it was more contemporary, that less than 3%, if you remove China, less than 3% of climate finance has been invested in developing countries, less than 3%.
True.
And the maximum possible mitigation that can be achieved will only happen if it is the developing countries that embrace green transitions. There is a mismatch between deployment of capital and climate ambitions that the world has signed on to in Paris.
True. You know, if you look at what happened, for instance, at the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war, the solidarity amongst the countries of the global South, what India did in ensuring that their stockholding on grains can actually be utilized on those countries, particularly in the South and in Africa in particular, who were actually affected by the disruption of those global chain when it came to agriculture, in my view, was one of the ways in which the global South can also work in solidarity with each other in addressing the common challenges.
And with the new development bank and the AIIB and new
Exactly.
instruments, you have possibilities of creating your own financial flows, right?
We do have the possibilities of actually creating new financial flows, in my view, and that has been proven. But also to address, without much conditionalities, because there will always be conditionalities, but in a manner in which the NDB, for instance, has sought to address the challenges of those countries who require capital. The conditionalities has not been so onerous that makes it, impossible for the countries to access the much needed financial assistance that they require for their own development.
And we must acknowledge, and for those who are joining us this year, we must, just for your information, it was at the South African presidency last year that BRICS expanded and now is it in its new avatar, which gives it more capabilities of building some of these and ramping up some of these financial institutions for purposes. So I think kudos to South Africa for leading that, and therefore we are counting on South Africa's G20 presidency to deliver some results. Let me turn to, and Maria, I'm going to come to you. You like me are someone who runs an institution who watches and hears voices, and I'm going to come to you for your take. And it's going to be ear sweep, the year gone by and your views of that. But let me first turn to Latin America and my colleague Carolina Chimoy, journalist with Deutsche Welle, but someone who is deeply linked to Latin America, geography I want to bring in for obvious reasons and its importance. From where you sit and from the work you've been doing, multilateralism and the global South, and that's a big question here. Do you believe the global South can lead? Do you think there is now enough evidence, Indonesian presidency, Indian presidency, Brazilian presidency, and South Africa's remarkable leadership in the last couple of years? Do you believe that the time for global South has come?
I think, Samir, it's probably a momentum for the global South, indeed, but not only because it's what I think It's important, and the minister already mentioned it, to take a look at the numbers. If we see the BRICS as the leading nations of the global south, economically they represent 36% of the global GDP. 45% of the global population comes from the BRICS, and it's only growing. So this is like the financial, the number parts, but then also the political part, the diplomatic part. The BRICS, I don't think we should see them as countries or as a group who would be stepping in instead of the Western allies, but in a different shape. Like, for example, as a bridge between North and South, as a group of countries who understand both sides and who can support to have a dialogue between both sides. Because of historical reasons, but also because of the financial reasons and the power that the BRICS are getting increasingly. And that could, of course, lead to a multilateral system where the BRICS would have a crucial role.
No, I want to ask you two questions. Since I'm on Latin America, let me ask you two questions. One is, of course, as Madam Speaker mentioned, the Russia-Ukraine question and the Latin American view on that. We saw there was in many ways, a kind of similar view across most of the countries across this continent where we are sitting and in many parts of where I come from. What is the LATAM view? And of course, let me also ask you the question about this G2 world, the new Cold War as people talk about. What is China up to in Latin America? What is the Chinese presence? What does it do to the American influence in the region? What's happening there?
Okay, starting with very different questions, by the way.
I know.
Starting with Ukraine, Latin America, most of the countries there want to maintain their neutrality. They don't want to be too involved in this war, in this conflict. And I like to put things down to specific examples. And in this case, I would like to pick up the example of Brazil. As you know, that was 2023, after 1 year of the war in Ukraine, and Chancellor Scholz went to Brazil for a meeting with Lula da Silva and asked him explicitly to please deliver ammunition for the German Leopard tanks. Lula da Silva said he won't do that. He doesn't want to deliver ammunition for Ukraine and to see his weapons and his kind of military support. And that's where I would come back to your point, where I do see the Global South in a role in this conflict, but more in a solidarity supportive way and not military involved. And I think that is the role that also a lot of countries in Latin America want to have on Ukraine. And on China, the influence of China, as you know, is enormous. It's huge. It started with trade, buying commodities from Latin America, and then it went into huge infrastructure projects. And I'm talking about, for example, the interoceanic road, right, connecting both oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, crossing Latin America. But then also during the APEC summit that happened before the G20 summit, a very important port in Peru was inaugurated by Xi Jinping, who was there. And he was playing a key role while President Biden from the US was really in the second or even third row, similar to the family picture of the G20 where they forgot about Biden. I'm sorry, they did not forget, but
Biden forgot that there was the photograph being taken.
Biden was a bit slow to get to the family picture, so they had to take a second picture where he was also there. But you can clearly see that Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi are in the middle of this picture. So I think it's important to see this signs and to see how big the influence of China is becoming in Latin America. And what does that mean for the other BRICS, for the other countries besides China? I don't know. I would be interested also in knowing how interesting Latin America is for the other BRICS countries. But that is a question from my side, if I may.
Maria, you've been hosting these conversations now for many years, for the last 2 or 3 years. I've attended some of your conversations you've hosted in Berlin and other places. How do you see, over the last few years, this trend line that has seen some of the nations from the Global South emerge and become more visible and influential actors in the global stage? A force for good, some may argue, a disruptive force, others may assess them as. What is your view as someone who heads this, big institution that engages with all sorts of voices and views?
Well, I don't head it, I help manage it. But other than that, thank you very much. And I think that, let me just add to what we've been hearing, one element, and that is the factor of what is legally binding and what is not legally binding. And in terms of the multilateral organizations, we do have to realize the fact that the one multilateral body or system that has a series of instruments that call for legally binding decisions is the UN. So in that sense, all of the other groupings that we have are extremely important, especially in bringing forth ideas, bringing forth alternatives, generating the momentum. And that is where, as I think we've all heard and we all agree, the Global South today, or the South today, can play a particularly significant role and is playing a particularly significant role. But not only because it is generating ideas and alternative, but also because it is acting. As the speaker was saying, using the instruments, it is acting. And therefore the Global South is already present, I think. That doesn't mean that the multilateral system doesn't need reform. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, let us bring forth those alternatives, and alternatives that, as President Mbeki very clearly shared this morning, and we have all heard, it's getting to the how. How do we achieve the aspirations of the Global South, which are aspirations that are shared by others, but not by everybody. So it's also a matter of building those consensus and achieving those, in order to achieve those goals. Now, if we look at what is going on in the multilateral system, and as Prime Minister Mara was saying earlier, for decades we have been speaking about reform of this system and reform of the UN, reform of the Security Council. But there are also a number of other processes where initiatives and alternatives can be brought forth. Many of them, or several of them, are going to be taking place in 2025 during the South African presidency of the G20, and it's important to bring them to this discussion, I think. One is the Financing for Development, the Financing for Development Conference, which is a UN conference, and I dare to say that it'll have summit dimensions and not just be another conference. And why is that important? Because a number of the challenges that we're facing require resources, financial resources. Mm-hmm. And if resources are going elsewhere because of the various conflicts in which the countries are engaged, and there is defense expenditure that's going up and military expenditures that are going up, and a number of others, where is the money going to be coming from?
Actually, on this point, and I want to come to the panel on this particular question, but let me ask you, Maria. When you are sitting in the Global South in a developing country, it is astounding that when banks are in crisis, 2008-9, I'm going to that period now, you have leaders of the world, the G20 leaders, walk to the mic, I think at the London conference, and commit $5 to $6 trillion to save the banks. Somehow, the same political leaders who say, public finance is limited, are able to conjure up trillions of dollars to save the banks. Come now, flash forward 20 years later, or 17 years later, you have now a conflict happening. And the same countries that don't know how to produce public finance for development or public finance for climate are diverting $200, $300 billion for fighting a war. The same countries who can't produce money to save the planet are fighting partisan wars for political purposes, to defend borders, to change borders, to reinforce borders. I'm not getting into the nature of the conflict. All I'm saying here is that public finance is available for certain tasks, is not available for the planet. How does that accusation, and how does that direct accusation that Global South has indicted the North with and has led to the failure in trust, shape the future of multilateralism? Maybe you can try this, and I will come to you, Minister Anand Sharma, for your views, and Prime Minister Musa Mara as well. And then I want to come to the speaker to think about these responses and reflect on it. So let me start with Maria, and then...
No, please. Minister, please. No, fine. Yeah.
Thank you. You see, one observation I want to make. Yes, there is talk in the world of G2, but it is an unreal world. G2 cannot be possible. The world is multipolar. You have different continents. You have nations who have aspirations, who have huge populations, especially the younger population. Take the case of Africa, some of the fastest growing economies. So what is important is that how we put our minds together when South Africa now has the G20 chair to push forward the agenda which can uphold a democratic multilateral order, a rule-based order. It's moribund. There's paralysis. It is frozen because what has happened, the architects are not interested in reform unless and until we push for that. Because you cannot have in today's world a multilateral order frozen in 1945 when most of our countries were not free nations. Asia, Africa, and Latin America, countries which have today rightful aspirations to make their own contribution. About the transfer of resources, we have our own resources also, sharing of technologies. That should be more and more encouraged among the countries of the South-South cooperation. As President Mbeki had said, India has always been a votary of that, so has been Africa. And what we can do to address some of the challenges which are common across the world, but more pronounced in our regions. Take of hunger. 800 million people, that's also maybe not the right number. Close to 1/8 of the world's population of 8 billion. And the same thing, $1 a day, the UN mandated what is for sustenance. Is it adequate, even $1 or $2 for a human being to survive? World has enough food, but so many people going hungry to bed. That is an issue which needs urgent redressal. Also, how we have, without stability and peace, we cannot achieve these objectives. And what I have always said, countries with large populations, we have to harness the potential of the youth. If we do not, what we say is a demographic dividend will become a whirlwind. We have to provide opportunities. We have to give them access to resources, finance, as we are doing in India also and other countries. But together, the reshaping and rebalancing of the world order must remain a priority. It's not only the United Nations, because we hear the latest statement of reinvigorating the General Assembly. Same language is used in another paragraph, reinvigorating the Security Council. How? Unless and until it's expanded in both the categories, permanent and non-permanent, to bring in those who have been excluded for historical reasons. We cannot claim an international order as democratic and equitable if it excludes the entire continent of Africa. Of course, Africa will address that. The Common Africa position is there. That declaration is there. Excludes Latin America, excludes the largest democracy on the planet, India, and we say that this is the world order. So those things have to change, and same applies to the financial institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions. Unless and until that is done. And there has to be some sincerity and a sense of urgency. Because G20 is a platform, how it came into being. I said so earlier, and how BRICS came into being. What were the compulsions? BRICS came because these are emerging economies which are contributing hugely to the global economy and the future. And the G20's birth took place because of the Asian financial crisis, and it registered, the penny dropped then, that the G7 alone cannot manage the global economic and financial governance. So now this is a challenge and an opportunity, how I view it, but we should be clear about our goals and which pathway will take us there to negotiate, to persuade. It's not a question of entering into a conflict. The other side is not going to disappear, but the BRICS Plus message from Kazan, reaffirming what the Johannesburg message was when South Africa hosted the earlier BRICS on the UN reforms, is very reassuring. And also BRICS Plus sends a message of the much needed check and balance in power, particularly questioning the West-led domination. So that is equally important. That has to be, it's not speaking against, entering into a conflict zone, it is saying what is correct, what is required, what must be done.
Prime Minister, can I turn to you?
I'm going to give you an example of what we see over the world, and taking the example from my area, West Africa. 2 years ago, our organization, ECOWAS, settled its own security strategy. We face a lot of security issues in West Africa, especially in Sahelian region, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And this security strategy requires $1 billion a year. ECOWAS asked for this financing from African Union and for UN, and ECOWAS got nothing. $1 billion is what is done to Ukraine every single week. That shows how unequal is the world. And I think now we have a lot of exemplars of how unequal is the world. My concern is we should now stop complaining. And we should find some specific goals to achieve among us in the Global South that require more solidarity within Global South countries. And we are not talking about that. And how to strengthen the Global South in order to get the reform done in the UN system and the other system like a financing of the development. This is the main issue I think we have to put our attention on. Stop complaining, stop talking, try to get some specific goal everywhere in every issues, and put our strength together in order to get it. We have to be now more concrete, more precise.
Madam Speaker, may I request you to come in?
Well, for me, as I said earlier, consistency is important to make sure that we continue to push for the reform of the multilateral institution. But also what other ways, other than the alternatives that I referred to, such as BRICS, IPSA, and other fora, but inclusion of society into engaging in those struggles, as we have learned in our experiences before, in my view, becomes important. I think beyond the think tanks, we also need to find a way how we mobilize the people of the South to actually push for these reforms, while at the same time look at alternatives where we can actually, have solidarity amongst each other. I would also say not disengaging the North. If you look at the issue of Gaza, how even within the Northern Hemisphere, ordinary citizens became a thorn to their governments.
Correct.
In pushing them to take a particular stand, to protect, to give humanitarian support, but also to stop sending ammunition. So I'm saying there's a multiple of strategies that we need to use, but also is to what extent we use our numbers to actually bring the pressure to bear.
So in fact, by the way, I think it's fantastic to use the power of communication and social media to reach out to constituencies around the world, to mobilize them, to pressurize their own governments, and to do to their governments what they did to our governments in the last century to behave in certain ways. I think that's a very valid point, that why don't we use the power of amplification to in many ways now demand ethical action from those sitting in, and perhaps now define the liberal order for them. The liberal order question that we wanted to discuss in the beginning, we might really want to say that this is where liberalism is going to be defined and how it must be viewed and preserved and saved. You wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think that is precisely the example I was looking for the bridge that I was talking about. I think the Global South might be right now in a role where it can strengthen institutions that are already there, but at the same time filling in gaps like the one that you mentioned, bringing in communities that the Western countries would not be able to bring into the dialogue. So I think these are two very important aspects that I wanted to mention.
And the P20
The P20.
is a great forum to actually do this.
Actually, the P20 is a great opportunity to do that because it brings in the parliamentarians who are public representatives. And what role can the P20 also play in ensuring the mobilization of the communities in actually articulating what are the issues of the South, but also how do we put pressure on the parliamentarians in the North? Because if you look at Brazil, for instance, the P20 also brought in the Interparliamentary Union into the discourse, to not only talking amongst ourselves as members of the P20, but also to speak broader to other parliamentarians of the world about what are the important issues of the South.
There's an IMF estimate that 60% of global growth, and this is the point Prime Minister Musamara was making, that 60% of global growth comes from the developing and emerging economies, 60%. And it's likely to be a larger number in the coming decade. This trend line is moving north. And the point the Prime Minister made, and this is my final thoughts for all of you, the point Prime Minister made was that with so much resources now being generated in these dynamic economies of the South, is it time to architect, to move beyond solidarity and to architect institutions that allow exchange of technologies and innovations and even financial resources to serve the purpose of the South? So one big idea or two big ideas as parting thoughts from each one of you. What could the South do better to tap into the youth, the additional financial muscles, and the political mobilizations that today we have seen are possible courtesy our connected world? So just a couple of thoughts from each one of you as we close this.
You just speak about institution and strengthening them. I mean, today, here in Cape Town, who brought us together? ORF and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. There are many think tanks who are here and individuals who can actually play a pivotal role in ensuring that we strengthen but also develop new institutions that can be able to drive the agenda. But for ORF and TMF to exist, you need to ensure that the capacity, not only internal to those organizations, but also the funding to make sure that they continue to do the work. And this is where moving beyond solidarity, in my view, also means. India has been known of exporting a lot of IT specialists. And we know how that has revolutionized India, but also the globe. And how can we actually utilize some of those expertise that we have in order to ensure that we resolve the questions of development that our countries face? Not only begging, as Prime Minister was saying, but actually doing something on our own.
You know, on President Mbeki's very important point in the morning, President Mbeki, we promise you that as your team, we will put forward a draft for your consideration, a call for action from Cape Town for the G20 presidency of South Africa. We will make that happen. So that's a very valid point, and we should capture the conversations and make it into something that is digestible for our leaders. Minister Anand Sharma, let me turn to you now. One big idea or two big ideas as we close on how could South arrange themselves better, more effectively to tap into what they do possess?
Well, first, to speak in one voice with clarity. Second, prioritize what must be done. We have a long wish list, but not to get confused. Once we know that these are the goals which are achievable together, sharing not only the developmental experiences, but the strength of our institutions in the field of healthcare, in technologies, in the digital world, like the speaker of a sister had said on India. Yes, we missed the first 3 industrial revolutions, but leapfrogged when we embraced the communication and information technology revolutions to be where we are as a global leader in this field and also in the digital field. But we took a decision long back in the New Delhi BRICS summit. The Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh was there. President Mbeki would remember. That was to create an institutional mechanism of the central banks of the BRIC countries for lending and trading in using our currencies also, creating a pool, and a special dedicated financial institution was set up. That is there. Mm-hmm. How we ensure that it is strengthened further, and what we have, as Prime Minister, former Prime Minister was saying, that time now for us to walk the talk, how we can share our technologies, because without any interest, as we used to say, for our technologies, which we have developed of many of our countries, India also, are AAA. They are affordable, available, and accessible for the countries of the South. And that's what we should do, reducing our dependence, not reinventing the wheels, but our people have the capacity. And we are not, as I've mentioned earlier, we are not challenging anyone, we are only asking for equity and justice.
I'm seeing the time's up counter, but I want to have all 3 short interventions. Maria, outside in view or inside out view, whichever one you want to take.
No.
You can wear both hats.
No. Basically, I think it's trying to identify, put aside differences and try to identify those areas, those interests that there are in common, be it in climate, be it in technology, as the Minister was saying. But the South has to talk to itself as well, and come forth with a voice as much as possible on the basis of those mutual interests.
Prime Minister?
In 1 minute, example from Africa. We have in Africa some big oil producers. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we have in Africa a lot of countries which are asking for oil, for their development, for power, for energy. How it is impossible in Africa to put our strength together on this way in order to share some part of this oil. Second is talking with the single voice about UN reform. Mm-hmm. Africa also is divided about it.
Yes.
We have to put our countries together on this issue and to have a same voice from Africa.
You want to come in?
I'm usually in your position, so I know you're under pressure, and I will elaborate on my answer. No, very short. I think it would be interesting to see more South-South cooperation. And the one voice thing, I would like to complement that. The Western countries are thinking more in nationalisms, so it would be very interesting to see the global South.
Think about internationalism.
Exactly, and speaking with one voice. I mean, especially if you have a fractured second half of the world.
No, I think we've absolutely run out of time. We've had a fantastic conversation. You've set the stage for the next 2 days, and we have, in many ways, a consensus in the panel. Have a crisp agenda, and a voice which is coherent and united, and coordinate and share amongst each other. I think that's the message from the stage. For South-led multilateralism, we need to do better. than those who were in charge before us. So with that, please join me in applauding this panel for their wonderful views, and let me turn it over to Shomi.
Thank you so much to the panelists. If I could invite you to the top of the stage for a quick photograph. Ma'am, a photograph. We will now take a short break just to stretch our legs, get some fresh air, get a cup of coffee, and then come back in.